Hello, beautiful soul. I'm Aurora, and welcome to Twin Flame Journey, a space where we explore the deeper meaning behind soul connections, divine timing, and the path that leads two hearts back to union. If you've been feeling the signs, you're in the right place.
What if the moment everyone dreams about in the twin flame journey is not the dramatic, emotional reunion most people imagine? What if the real sign of union is not fireworks, tears, and overwhelming passion, but peace? This idea surprises many people who are on the twin flame path. When someone first learns about twin flames, they often picture a love story filled with intensity, two souls separated by fate, finally coming together in a moment of emotional explosion. They imagine passionate declarations, endless excitement, and a relationship that feels like a constant storm of emotion. But those who have actually reached union often describe something very different. They don't talk about chaos. They don't talk about constant emotional highs. Instead, they describe something simple and profound: a quiet sense of coming home. So why is there such a gap between what people expect from twin flame union and what the experience is really like? To understand this, we first need to understand what the twin flame journey actually does to two people. The journey itself is rarely calm. In fact, most of the time it is anything but peaceful. When twin flames first meet, the connection can feel electric. Many people describe the encounter as life-changing. It can feel as if someone has looked directly into your soul and recognized parts of you that no one else ever noticed. This deep recognition can be beautiful, but it can also be terrifying. Why? Because the twin flame connection often acts like a mirror. It reflects not only the beautiful parts of ourselves, but also the wounds we have tried to hide. Old fears begin to surface. Insecurities that were buried suddenly come into the light. Emotional triggers appear where we least expect them. This is why many twin flame relationships begin with intense emotional cycles. There may be deep love followed by confusion, moments of closeness followed by sudden distance. One person may pull away while the other tries to hold on. This dynamic is often described as the runner and the chaser. The runner feels overwhelmed by the intensity of the connection and instinctively tries to escape it. The chaser feels the depth of the bond and tries to maintain it, sometimes with desperation. From the outside, this pattern can look dramatic, even painful. And for many people on the journey, it truly is. But here is the important part that is often misunderstood. All of this chaos is not the final destination. It is the transformation process. The emotional storms that happen during the journey are not signs that the connection is broken. They're signs that something deep inside both individuals is being challenged and reshaped. Each separation, each misunderstanding, each emotional trigger, all of it pushes both people to grow. Slowly, they begin to confront their fears. They start healing old wounds that existed long before the relationship ever began. They learn to recognize patterns of attachment, insecurity, and emotional dependence. And this is where something remarkable begins to happen. Instead of trying to control the relationship, both people begin to work on themselves. Instead of chasing validation, they begin to find stability within their own lives. Instead of reacting emotionally to every trigger, they start to observe their feelings with greater awareness. This stage can take time, sometimes years, because true emotional growth cannot be rushed. But as the inner work deepens, the energy of the connection slowly begins to change. The intense emotional turbulence that once defined the relationship begins to soften. The need to chase fades. The impulse to run disappears. And something new begins to replace those old patterns: balance. This is the point many people do not expect. Because after such an intense journey, people often imagine that the final union will feel even more dramatic. But in reality, the opposite is usually true. Union often feels calm, not boring, not empty, but calm in a way that feels deeply safe. It is the kind of calm that happens when two people no longer feel the need to fight their own fears inside the relationship. Imagine two people who once triggered each other constantly. Every small misunderstanding would turn into a long emotional conversation. Every silence felt threatening. Every moment of distance created anxiety. Now, imagine those same two people after years of personal growth. They still love each other deeply, but they no longer panic when emotions appear. They no longer assume the worst during quiet moments. They no longer react to every feeling as if it is an emergency. Instead, they have learned something that many relationships never reach: emotional maturity. And this is one of the most powerful transformations that happens after twin flame union. The relationship stops being a battlefield for unresolved wounds. Instead, it becomes a space where both people feel supported in their growth. This does not mean the relationship becomes perfect. Disagreements still happen. Difficult days still appear. But the way those challenges are handled changes completely. Instead of reacting with fear, both partners respond with awareness. Instead of assuming rejection, they communicate openly. Instead of trying to control each other, they respect each other's emotional space. This shift may not look dramatic from the outside, but internally it feels profound. Many people who reach this stage describe it as a deep sense of emotional relief. For the first time in the entire journey, they are not fighting the connection. They are simply living it. And this brings us back to the surprising truth we mentioned at the beginning. Union is not about endless emotional intensity. It is about peace. A peace that comes from two people who have finally learned to stand on their own emotional foundations. A peace that comes from knowing the connection is no longer threatened by fear. A peace that allows love to exist without constant struggle.
So let me ask you something.
When you imagine twin flame union, what do you picture? Do you imagine dramatic confessions of love? A passionate reunion filled with tears and overwhelming emotion? Or have you ever considered that the real sign of union might be something quieter, something steadier, something that feels less like a storm and more like coming home? When most people first hear about the concept of twin flames, their imagination immediately begins to paint a picture. It often looks like a movie: two souls separated by fate, years of longing, a dramatic reunion where everything suddenly falls into place, music swelling in the background, tears in their eyes, a passionate embrace that feels like the universe itself is celebrating their love. This vision is powerful, emotional, and incredibly appealing. It speaks to something deep inside us, the desire for a love that is destined, magical, and powerful enough to overcome every obstacle. And because this vision is so compelling, many people begin their twin flame journey believing that union will look exactly like that. They imagine the moment when the runner finally returns. They picture a long emotional conversation where every misunderstanding is resolved in a single night. They expect intense romance, overwhelming passion, and a relationship that feels constantly electrifying. In other words, they expect drama. But this expectation comes from a misunderstanding of what the twin flame journey is truly designed to do. The truth is, much of the drama people associate with twin flames does not represent union. It represents the process before union. It represents the phase where both individuals are still healing. Yet many people confuse the emotional intensity of the journey with the final state of the connection. Why does this happen? Because human beings are naturally drawn to intensity. From movies and television to novels and social media stories, the most memorable love stories are rarely calm. They are filled with conflict, obstacles, heartbreak, and emotional tension. Think about the most famous romantic stories in history: Romeo and Juliet, Tristan and Isolde, or countless modern love stories where the couple spends most of the story fighting against circumstances, misunderstandings, or their own emotional struggles. These stories are powerful precisely because they are dramatic. Drama captures attention. Conflict creates suspense. And emotional extremes make the story feel unforgettable. But real-life relationships, especially spiritually evolved ones, do not thrive on constant drama. In fact, drama is often a sign that something inside the relationship is not yet balanced. When emotions constantly swing between extreme closeness and painful distance, it usually means unresolved fears are still active. Fear of abandonment, fear of rejection, fear of losing control, fear of being vulnerable. During the earlier stages of the twin flame journey, these fears tend to surface very strongly. The connection between twin flames is so intense that it can activate emotional wounds that have been buried for years, sometimes decades. And when those wounds are triggered, people react instinctively. One person may become overly attached, seeking reassurance and closeness. The other may feel overwhelmed and pull away. This is the famous runner and chaser dynamic. The chaser often believes that union will happen when the runner finally realizes how strong the connection is. They imagine that once the runner returns, everything will suddenly become perfect. But this belief creates another illusion. It assumes that union is simply about two people being physically together again. In reality, union is much deeper than physical presence. It is an energetic and emotional alignment. And alignment cannot exist if both individuals are still operating from fear. This is why many twin flame separations happen in the first place. They are not punishments. They are not failures. They are pauses that allow both individuals to grow into the people they need to become. Yet during separation, the mind often fills the silence with fantasy. People begin to imagine the future reunion in very dramatic ways. They picture emotional apologies. They imagine passionate declarations of love. They expect a moment where everything that went wrong in the past is suddenly explained and healed. But the real transformation usually happens long before any reunion conversation takes place. It happens internally. Each person slowly begins to understand themselves better. The chaser starts to recognize their own patterns of emotional dependency. They begin to realize that their happiness cannot depend entirely on another person's presence. At the same time, the runner begins to face the fears that caused them to escape the connection in the first place. They begin to understand that avoiding vulnerability does not actually create safety. It only creates distance. As both individuals grow, something interesting happens. The emotional intensity that once defined the connection begins to soften. Not because the love is disappearing, but because the fear is dissolving. This shift can feel confusing at first, especially for those who believed that intense emotions were the main proof of a twin flame bond. When the chaos fades, some people even wonder if the connection itself is fading. But in reality, the opposite is happening. The connection is becoming more stable, more grounded, more real, because true spiritual union is not built on emotional extremes. It is built on balance. Think about the difference between a storm and a calm ocean. During a storm, the waves crash violently. The energy is dramatic and powerful, but it is also unpredictable and dangerous. In contrast, a calm ocean is steady. The surface may look peaceful, but beneath it lies incredible depth and strength. This is what happens when twin flames approach true union. The relationship begins to resemble the calm ocean rather than the storm. The connection is still powerful. The love is still deep. But it no longer needs chaos to prove its intensity. Another illusion people often carry is the belief that union will solve all personal problems. They imagine that once their twin flame returns, they will finally feel complete, finally secure, finally fulfilled. But this expectation places an impossible responsibility on the relationship. No one person can permanently fix another person's emotional struggles. Union is not meant to replace inner healing. It is meant to occur after that healing has already begun. By the time true union happens, both individuals usually have learned how to create emotional stability within their own lives. They have developed independence. They have built self-respect. They have learned how to face their own fears without relying entirely on the relationship for reassurance. And because of this, the relationship no longer carries the heavy pressure of trying to complete someone. Instead, it becomes something much healthier. A partnership. Two whole individuals choosing to walk together. Not because they need each other to survive emotionally, but because they genuinely enrich each other's lives. This is a very different type of love than the dramatic love stories most people are used to. It may not look as exciting on the surface. There may be fewer emotional explosions, fewer sleepless nights filled with overthinking, fewer desperate attempts to hold the connection together. But what replaces that chaos is something far more valuable.
Trust,
Safety, emotional stability, and perhaps most importantly, freedom. Because when two people are no longer driven by fear, they no longer feel the need to control each other. They allow space. They respect boundaries. They communicate honestly instead of reacting impulsively. And slowly, the relationship begins to feel lighter, more natural, more peaceful. This is why many people who finally experience union describe it in a surprising way. They say it feels normal. Not ordinary in the sense of being boring, but normal in the sense that love finally flows without constant struggle, without emotional games, without the exhausting cycles of running and chasing. And this realization often challenges the original fantasy people had about twin flame union. Because the real beauty of union is not found in dramatic moments. It is found in the quiet stability that comes after years of emotional growth.
So let me ask you something.
If union no longer looks like the dramatic love story you once imagined, if it becomes calmer, quieter, and more balanced, would you still recognize it when it arrives? Or would you still be waiting for the fireworks while the real connection is already standing peacefully in front of you? If you look at many twin flame stories during the early stages of the journey, they often sound very similar. There are intense emotions,
Deep attraction.
moments of incredible connection, and then suddenly conflict appears. Misunderstandings grow. One person pulls away. The other feels hurt, confused, and desperate to fix the situation. This cycle can repeat many times. Sometimes the connection feels magical. Other times it feels exhausting. And because of this, many people begin to believe that drama is simply part of the twin flame experience forever. They assume that the emotional intensity, the arguments, and the painful separations will always exist. But something important changes as both individuals grow. Over time, the drama begins to fade. Not because the love disappears, but because the root causes of the drama slowly disappear. To understand this transformation, we need to look at where the drama actually comes from in the first place. Most relationship conflicts are not caused by the present moment. They are caused by unresolved emotions from the past. When someone reacts strongly to a small disagreement, the reaction usually comes from deeper fears that were formed long before the relationship began. For example, imagine someone who grew up feeling abandoned or emotionally neglected. Even if they do not consciously think about those experiences anymore, the emotional memory still exists inside them. So when their partner becomes distant or silent for a short time, their mind may interpret that moment as rejection. Suddenly, the emotional reaction becomes much stronger than the situation itself. Instead of simply thinking, they might be busy or tired, the mind jumps to conclusions like, they don't care about me anymore. They're losing interest. I'm about to be abandoned again. This kind of emotional trigger can quickly turn a small misunderstanding into a major conflict. And during the early stages of the twin flame journey, these triggers often appear very frequently.
Why?
Because the connection between twin flames is incredibly powerful. It activates emotions at a deeper level than most relationships. In many ways, a twin flame acts like a mirror. They reflect not only the parts of you that are loving, compassionate, and beautiful. They also reflect the parts of you that are afraid, the parts that still carry old pain, the parts that doubt their own worth. This mirroring effect can be uncomfortable, sometimes even overwhelming. One person may suddenly realize they have a fear of vulnerability. Another may discover how strongly they depend on external validation. These realizations can shake a person's emotional foundation. And when people feel emotionally exposed, their natural instinct is often to protect themselves. Some people protect themselves by chasing reassurance. They want constant communication, constant confirmation that the relationship is secure. Others protect themselves by pulling away. They create distance so they do not have to face the intensity of their own emotions. These protective reactions are what create much of the drama during the earlier phases of the twin flame journey. But here is the key point many people overlook. These reactions are not permanent. They are symptoms of inner wounds that have not yet been healed. And healing changes everything. As both individuals begin to work on themselves, they start to recognize their emotional patterns. They begin to notice when they are reacting from fear instead of responding from awareness. For example, someone who once panicked whenever their partner needed space might start to ask themselves a different question. Instead of thinking, "Why are they leaving me?" they may begin to think, "Why does this moment trigger so much fear in me?" This small shift in perspective is powerful because it moves the focus away from blaming the other person and toward understanding oneself. And the more someone understands their emotional triggers, the less power those triggers have. The same transformation happens for the person who once ran away from the connection. Instead of escaping whenever emotions become intense, they start to examine why vulnerability feels so frightening. They may realize that allowing someone to truly see them requires courage. It requires trust. And slowly, they begin to open themselves emotionally in ways they never did before. As these internal shifts happen on both sides, the entire dynamic of the relationship begins to change. The old patterns of chasing and running lose their energy. Conversations become calmer. Reactions become slower and more thoughtful. And gradually, the emotional storms that once defined the connection begin to settle. This is why drama fades after union. Not because two people suddenly become perfect, but because they become more aware of their own emotions. Instead of reacting automatically, they pause. They listen. They communicate. Imagine two people who once argued frequently. Before their personal growth, even small disagreements could escalate quickly. One person might raise their voice. The other might become defensive. Both might feel misunderstood. Now, imagine those same two people after years of inner work. The same disagreement happens. But this time, the reaction is different. Instead of immediately arguing, one person says calmly, "I think we're both feeling frustrated right now. Let's take a moment and talk about what's actually bothering us." The other person listens instead of preparing a counterattack. Suddenly, the situation changes. The disagreement is no longer a battle. It becomes a conversation. This shift might seem small, but it transforms the entire relationship. Because drama usually grows when emotions are expressed without awareness. When people react instantly to every feeling, conflicts can spiral out of control. But when people learn to pause and understand their emotions first, conflicts become opportunities for deeper understanding. And this is exactly what happens after true twin flame union. The relationship evolves from emotional reaction to emotional awareness, from conflict driven by fear to communication guided by trust. Another reason drama fades is that both individuals stop trying to control the connection. During earlier stages, people often feel anxious about the future of the relationship. They want certainty. They want reassurance that the connection will not disappear. This anxiety can lead to attempts to control outcomes, trying to force conversations, trying to define the relationship too quickly, trying to prevent the other person from leaving. But after significant personal growth, this need for control begins to dissolve. Both individuals become more secure within themselves. They realize that love cannot be forced. And paradoxically, when control disappears, the relationship becomes stronger. Because it is no longer driven by fear. It is driven by choice. Two people choosing to stay, choosing to communicate, choosing to support each other's growth. This type of connection feels very different from the chaotic relationships people often see in movies or social media. It may look quieter, less dramatic, but it is also far more stable. The love becomes steady instead of explosive. The connection becomes grounding instead of overwhelming. And for many twin flames, this is the moment when they finally understand the real purpose of the entire journey. The chaos was never the goal. The drama was never the destination. Those experiences were simply catalysts for growth. They were lessons that pushed both individuals to heal parts of themselves they might have ignored otherwise. And once that healing takes place, the relationship naturally transforms. The storms pass. The emotional waves calm down. And what remains is something deeper than intensity, something stronger than drama, a connection built on awareness, trust, and emotional maturity. But this raises an important question. If drama fades when healing happens, If the emotional storms quiet down once both people grow, then how can you recognize the difference between a connection that is truly evolving and one that is simply losing its intensity? One of the most widely discussed dynamics in the twin flame journey is something many people call the runner and chaser cycle. If you have ever experienced a twin flame connection, this pattern might feel painfully familiar. At one point, the relationship feels incredibly close. Conversations flow effortlessly. The emotional bond feels undeniable. There is a sense that the connection is special, almost destined. Then suddenly something shifts. One person becomes distant. Messages take longer to respond to. Plans begin to change. Emotional walls appear where there was once openness. And almost instantly, the other person feels it. The distance creates anxiety. Questions begin to appear in the mind. Did I do something wrong? Why are they pulling away? Are they losing interest? This moment is often the beginning of the chasing energy. The chaser tries to restore the closeness that once existed. They might reach out more often. They may try to have deeper conversations about the relationship. They might attempt to explain the connection in hopes that the other person will understand it the same way. Meanwhile, the runner feels overwhelmed by the intensity. It's not always that the runner doesn't care. In many cases, they care deeply. But the emotional depth of the connection can trigger fears they are not ready to face. So instead of leaning into the relationship, they move away from it. Sometimes they withdraw quietly. Other times they create distractions, focusing on work, friendships, or other relationships. And occasionally, they may even deny the connection entirely. From the outside, this cycle can look confusing and even painful. The more one person tries to get closer, the more the other seems to retreat. The more the runner pulls away, the more the chaser feels compelled to hold on. This push and pull dynamic can repeat for months or even years. But here is something important that many people misunderstand about this phase of the twin flame journey. The runner and chaser roles are not fixed identities. They are temporary emotional responses. They are patterns created by unresolved fears. The chaser is often someone who has a deep desire for emotional closeness and reassurance. When they sense distance, their instinct is to move closer in order to protect the connection. The runner, on the other hand, is often someone who struggles with vulnerability. When emotions become intense, their instinct is to create space so they do not feel overwhelmed. Both reactions come from the same root:
Fear.
the chaser fears losing the connection. The runner fears losing control of their emotional independence. And as long as these fears remain unexamined, the cycle continues. This is why the early stages of the twin flame journey can feel so exhausting. It is not just about love. It is about confronting emotional patterns that were formed long before the relationship ever began. But the journey does not stay in this stage forever. Something begins to shift when both individuals start focusing on their own healing. For the chaser, this transformation often begins with a difficult realization. They begin to understand that constantly chasing the connection does not actually create security. In fact, it can sometimes create the opposite effect. The more someone pursues reassurance, the more pressure the other person may feel. And eventually the chaser begins to ask themselves an important question. What if my peace does not depend on this person staying? This question can feel uncomfortable at first, but it opens the door to personal growth. Instead of focusing all their energy on the relationship, the chaser starts to rebuild their own emotional stability. They reconnect with their own life, their passions, their friendships, their personal goals. Slowly, they begin to realize that their identity is not defined by the relationship alone. They are a complete individual, with or without the connection being active. At the same time, the runner begins their own transformation. As time passes, the distance they created may no longer bring the emotional relief they expected. Instead, they may start to feel something surprising. They miss the connection. Not the pressure. Not the emotional intensity, but the authenticity of it. Twin flame connections often have a level of emotional honesty that is difficult to find elsewhere. And once the runner has experienced that depth, it can be difficult to completely forget. But returning to the connection requires something the runner may not have practiced before: emotional openness. They must face the fears that caused them to run in the first place. Fear of vulnerability, fear of losing independence, fear of being seen too deeply. And as the runner works through these fears, they begin to develop something new: emotional courage. Meanwhile, the chaser is learning emotional independence. When both of these transformations happen simultaneously, the entire dynamic of the relationship changes. The chase disappears. The running stops. Because neither person is operating from fear anymore. Instead, both individuals begin to approach the connection from a place of balance. This is the stage where emotional stability begins to emerge. Instead of one person constantly pursuing and the other constantly withdrawing, both partners begin to meet each other in the middle. Communication becomes more natural. Space is respected instead of feared. Closeness is welcomed instead of avoided. And the relationship starts to feel very different from the earlier phases of the journey. Imagine two people who once spent months caught in the runner-chaser cycle. One person was always trying to talk about the relationship. The other was always trying to avoid those conversations. Now, imagine those same two people after they have done significant inner work. When they talk, the conversation feels calmer. If one person needs time alone, the other does not immediately assume rejection. If a difficult emotion appears, both are willing to explore it rather than escape from it. This new dynamic is not based on emotional urgency. It is based on emotional trust. And trust creates stability. Stability is something many people do not expect from a twin flame relationship. Because the early stages of the journey are often so intense that people assume the intensity will continue forever. But true union brings something much more valuable than intensity. It brings peace. A peace that comes from knowing the relationship is no longer controlled by fear. Both individuals feel safe expressing themselves. They feel free to grow as individuals while still supporting each other. And perhaps most importantly, they no longer feel the need to prove the connection through emotional extremes. Love becomes quieter, but also stronger. Instead of dramatic highs and painful lows, the relationship begins to feel steady, reliable, grounded. This does not mean passion disappears. In fact, many twin flames discover that their emotional and physical connection becomes deeper after stability is reached. But the passion is no longer chaotic. It becomes balanced with respect, understanding, and mutual support. This is the moment when many people realize that the entire runner and chaser phase was actually preparing them for something much healthier. It was teaching them how to face their own fears, how to become emotionally independent, how to build trust instead of relying on control. And once these lessons are learned, the old cycle no longer has a reason to exist. The chase ends. The running stops. Two people who once seemed to move in opposite directions finally find themselves walking side by side. Not because they are forced to stay, not because they fear losing each other, but because they have both become emotionally strong enough to choose the connection freely. And this transformation raises another important question. If the runner and chaser dynamic disappears after union, how does communication change once both partners are finally operating from emotional balance instead of fear? One of the most noticeable changes that happens after twin flame union is not something dramatic or flashy. It is something much quieter. Communication changes. In the earlier stages of the twin flame journey, communication often feels emotionally charged. Every conversation seems to carry hidden meanings. Every silence can feel significant. Even a small misunderstanding may trigger long emotional discussions or sudden distance. Why does this happen? Because during those early phases, both people are still learning how to understand their own emotions. When someone is unsure of their feelings or afraid of losing the connection, communication can easily become reactive instead of thoughtful. A simple message might be interpreted in the wrong way. A delayed response might feel like rejection. A disagreement might feel like a threat to the entire relationship. This is why early twin flame conversations can sometimes feel intense or even overwhelming. Two people may care deeply about each other, but their fears and insecurities still influence the way they express themselves. Sometimes the chaser tries to talk about the relationship repeatedly, hoping to find reassurance. Meanwhile, the runner may avoid those conversations because they feel emotionally pressured. One person wants clarity. The other wants space. Both needs are valid, but without emotional balance, those needs can collide instead of complementing each other. As a result, conversations may turn into emotional debates rather than understanding. But when both individuals grow and move closer to union, something remarkable begins to happen. Communication becomes calmer. Not because the relationship becomes less important, but because both people have learned how to approach each other with greater emotional awareness. They no longer speak only from their immediate feelings. They begin to speak from understanding. This change may seem simple, but it transforms the entire dynamic of the relationship. For example, imagine a situation from the early stages of the twin flame journey. One person sends a message expressing something personal or vulnerable. Hours pass without a reply. In the past, this silence might trigger anxiety. Thoughts start racing through the mind. Did I say something wrong? Are they ignoring me? Maybe they don't feel the same way anymore. By the time a response finally arrives, the emotional reaction may already be intense. The conversation that follows may include frustration, accusations, or defensive explanations. But after union, the same situation often unfolds very differently. If a message takes time to receive a reply, the immediate assumption is no longer negative. Instead of jumping to conclusions, there is patience. There is trust that the other person will respond when they are able. And when the conversation continues, it begins from a place of calm rather than emotional tension. This shift happens because both individuals have developed something essential: emotional security. When someone feels secure within themselves, they do not interpret every small event as a potential threat to the relationship. They allow space for normal human experiences, busy schedules, personal time, and emotional fluctuations. Another major difference in communication after union is honesty. During earlier stages of the journey, people sometimes hide their true feelings. The runner may avoid expressing vulnerability. The chaser may hide certain emotions to avoid pushing the other person away. Both individuals may carefully choose their words, trying to protect the connection from conflict. But this kind of cautious communication can create misunderstandings. When people do not express themselves honestly, their partner may never truly understand what they are feeling. After union, honesty becomes much easier because the fear of rejection has decreased. Both partners know that the connection is not fragile. They trust that difficult conversations will not destroy the relationship. So instead of avoiding uncomfortable topics, they address them with openness. For example, instead of silently feeling hurt, someone might say calmly, "I felt a little distant from you earlier today.
Can we talk about it?"
This type of communication invites understanding rather than conflict. The other person does not feel attacked. They feel included in the emotional process. And because both partners are committed to mutual growth, these conversations often strengthen the relationship rather than weaken it. Another powerful shift is the way disagreements are handled. Even the healthiest relationships include disagreements. Two people with different perspectives will not always see every situation the same way. But after twin flame union, disagreements rarely turn into emotional battles. Instead of trying to win the argument, both partners focus on understanding each other's perspective. They ask questions. They listen carefully. They acknowledge each other's feelings. For example, imagine two partners discussing a decision that affects both of them. In earlier stages of the journey, this discussion might quickly become defensive. One person insists on their viewpoint. The other feels misunderstood. The conversation becomes tense. But after union, the same discussion might sound very different. One partner might say, "I see why that option feels right for you. Can I share what concerns me about it?" The other responds, "Of course. I want to understand what you're feeling." This simple exchange changes the entire tone of the conversation. Instead of competing viewpoints, the discussion becomes collaborative. Both people work together to find a solution that respects their shared goals. And this brings us to one of the most beautiful aspects of communication after union. It becomes supportive rather than reactive. Each partner begins to see the other not as someone they must convince or control, but as someone they want to understand. They celebrate each other's growth. They encourage personal development. They listen when the other person needs to process emotions or experiences. In this environment, communication becomes a space of emotional safety. Both individuals feel comfortable expressing themselves without fear of judgment. And when communication becomes safe, something extraordinary happens. Love deepens. Not through dramatic moments or intense arguments, but through everyday conversations filled with respect and empathy. Many people who experience this stage of a twin flame relationship say that the connection finally feels natural. There is no need to analyze every word. No need to decode hidden meanings. Conversations flow easily, just like they would between two people who trust each other completely. This does not mean the relationship becomes silent or emotionally neutral. In fact, meaningful conversations often become deeper than ever before. Because both individuals feel comfortable exploring complex topics, life goals, personal struggles, spiritual growth, and shared dreams. The difference is that these conversations no longer carry the weight of fear. They are guided by curiosity and care. And this new form of communication creates a powerful foundation for the relationship. Because relationships do not survive on love alone. They survive on understanding, on the ability to express emotions honestly, on the willingness to listen even when the conversation is difficult. When these qualities are present, the connection becomes incredibly resilient. It can adapt to life's challenges without collapsing under pressure. And this is why communication after twin flame union often feels so different from the earlier stages of the journey. It is no longer driven by urgency. It is driven by clarity. It is no longer fueled by insecurity. It is guided by trust. But this transformation in communication also leads to another fascinating change in the relationship. If the conversations become calmer, if emotional reactions become more balanced, then how does the overall energy of the connection itself begin to change once the union is truly stable? Sometimes the easiest way to understand how a twin flame relationship changes after union is not through theory, but through a story. Because when people hear concepts like emotional healing, energetic balance, or spiritual growth, those ideas can feel abstract. But when you see how two real individuals transform over time, the change becomes much clearer. So, imagine two people. Let's call them Daniel and Elena. When Daniel and Elena first met, neither of them was looking for a life-changing connection. Their meeting felt simple at first, just a conversation between two people who happened to share similar interests. But within a short time, something unusual became obvious. Their connection was deeper than either of them expected. They could talk for hours without feeling bored. They often finished each other's sentences. And sometimes they felt as if they could understand what the other person was feeling without a single word being spoken. At first, this closeness felt exciting. Daniel admired Elena's honesty and emotional depth. Elena admired Daniel's calm confidence and sense of direction. But the deeper their connection became, the more complicated things started to feel. Because along with the attraction came something neither of them expected: emotional triggers. Elena had spent many years building emotional independence. She valued open communication and believed that relationships should involve honesty about feelings. Daniel, however, had grown up in an environment where emotions were rarely discussed. When situations became emotionally intense, his natural instinct was to withdraw and process things privately. At the beginning, these differences were subtle. But as their relationship grew closer, the differences became more noticeable. If Elena sensed distance, she would ask direct questions. Is something wrong? Did I do something that upset you? Daniel often didn't know how to answer those questions. Not because he didn't care, but because he needed time to understand his own emotions before expressing them. And when he felt pressured to explain himself immediately, his instinct was to create more space. That space confused Elena. To her, distance felt like rejection. So she tried to close the distance by initiating more conversations about the relationship. She wanted reassurance that everything was still okay. But from Daniel's perspective, those conversations sometimes felt overwhelming. He felt as if he was constantly being asked to explain feelings he was still trying to understand. And slowly, the classic twin flame dynamic began to appear. Elena became the chaser. Daniel became the runner. The more Elena tried to talk about the relationship, the more Daniel pulled away to find emotional clarity. The more Daniel withdrew, the more Elena worried that the connection might disappear. Their bond was still strong, but the emotional tension between them began to grow. There were moments of incredible closeness, and then moments of painful silence. Sometimes they would reconnect and feel as if everything was perfect again. Other times they would drift apart for weeks. For a long time, neither of them understood why the relationship felt so intense and complicated. They both cared deeply about each other, but their emotional patterns kept pulling them in opposite directions. Eventually, after one particularly difficult misunderstanding, they decided to step away from the connection entirely. Not out of anger, but out of exhaustion. They both needed time to understand themselves. During this separation, something important began to happen. Elena started reflecting on her own emotional reactions. She realized that whenever Daniel pulled away, it triggered an old fear of abandonment she had carried since childhood. Even though she valued independence, part of her still felt anxious when someone she loved became distant. Instead of trying to control the connection, she began focusing on her own healing. She practiced self-reflection. She rebuilt parts of her life that had been neglected during the emotional intensity of the relationship. Her friendships grew stronger. Her personal passions returned. And gradually, she began to feel emotionally stable again. Meanwhile, Daniel was experiencing his own transformation. Without the constant emotional conversations, he finally had the quiet space he needed to examine his feelings. He realized that his instinct to withdraw during emotional moments was not simply about needing space. It was about avoiding vulnerability. Opening up emotionally felt uncomfortable to him because he had never learned how to do it safely. But as time passed, Daniel began working on that fear. He started reading about emotional awareness. He began practicing honest communication with close friends. And slowly, he discovered something surprising. Expressing emotions did not make him weak. It made his relationship stronger. Months later, when Daniel and Elena unexpectedly spoke again, something had changed. The connection between them was still present, but the emotional energy felt different. There was no urgency, no pressure, no desperate need to fix the past. They simply talked, and the conversation felt calm. Elena no longer felt the need to analyze every pause in Daniel's responses. Daniel no longer felt overwhelmed by Elena's openness. They both listened more carefully. They both spoke more honestly. And for the first time since they had met, the relationship felt balanced. The runner and chaser dynamic had disappeared, not because they forced it to end, but because both of them had grown beyond the fears that created it. Over time, they spent more time together again. But the relationship no longer felt like an emotional roller coaster. It felt steady, comfortable, peaceful. If Daniel needed time alone, Elena understood that it was simply part of his natural rhythm. If Elena wanted to share her emotions, Daniel no longer felt the need to escape those conversations. Instead, he listened with patience and curiosity. Their love had not become weaker. In fact, it had become deeper than before. But the intensity that once caused conflict had transformed into something much healthier. Mutual respect, emotional stability,
Trust.
Looking back, both of them realized something surprising. The most dramatic phase of their relationship had not been the union. It had been the journey toward it. All the misunderstandings, all the emotional triggers, all the painful separations. Those experiences were not signs that the connection was failing. They were lessons pushing both individuals to grow. Without those lessons, the relationship might have remained stuck in the same emotional patterns forever. But because both people were willing to face their fears and evolve, the connection eventually transformed. The storm passed, and what remained was something quieter, but far more powerful. A partnership built not on emotional urgency, but on emotional maturity. And when you hear stories like Daniel and Elena's, a deeper realization begins to emerge. Union is not the moment when two people suddenly fix everything. It is the moment when two people finally become ready to meet each other as their healthiest selves. But this transformation also leads to another fascinating shift in the relationship. If the emotional drama fades, if communication becomes calmer, what happens to the energetic connection itself once the relationship reaches this level of peace and stability? One of the most surprising changes that happens after twin flame union is the shift in emotional energy. During the earlier stages of the journey, the connection often feels extremely intense. Emotions rise quickly and powerfully. A single conversation can feel electrifying. A small disagreement can create overwhelming emotional waves. Many people describe the early twin flame experience as something that shakes their entire world. They feel emotions more deeply than they ever have before. Joy can feel euphoric, but confusion and pain can feel just as powerful. This emotional intensity is one of the reasons the twin flame connection feels so unforgettable. It is different from ordinary relationships because it activates the deepest layers of a human heart. But here is something that many people misunderstand. Intensity is not the final stage of the journey. It is the beginning of transformation. In the early phases of the connection, both individuals are still carrying unresolved emotional patterns. The twin flame bond acts like a spotlight that illuminates those patterns. Everything that was hidden suddenly becomes visible. Old wounds, unresolved fears, unspoken insecurities. Because these emotions are so deeply rooted, the connection can feel overwhelming at times. Imagine the ocean during a powerful storm. The waves are massive. The wind is chaotic. Energy is everywhere. It is dramatic and impossible to ignore. But that storm is not the natural state of the ocean. It is a temporary condition created by powerful forces interacting at once. The same thing happens during the early twin flame journey. Two powerful emotional worlds collide, and the result is intense movement. But as both individuals begin healing and understanding themselves more deeply, the storm gradually settles. The waves calm down, the wind slows, and the ocean returns to its natural state. Peaceful,
Deep.
stable. This is exactly what happens to the energetic connection between twin flames after union. The intensity that once felt chaotic transforms into something calmer and more grounded. At first, this change can feel confusing. Some people even worry that the connection has become weaker. After all, they may have spent years experiencing powerful emotional highs and lows. When the drama fades, the relationship can suddenly feel very different. But the truth is that the connection has not lost its power. It has simply evolved. Instead of emotional fireworks, there is emotional presence. Instead of overwhelming waves of feeling, there is steady warmth. Instead of constantly questioning the connection, there is quiet certainty. This transformation is similar to the difference between infatuation and deep love. Infatuation often feels explosive. It is exciting, unpredictable, and emotionally intense. But it is also unstable. Deep love, on the other hand, feels steady. It may not create constant emotional chaos, but it provides something much more valuable.
Security.
When twin flames reach union, their relationship begins to shift from emotional intensity toward emotional safety. They no longer need dramatic moments to confirm the connection is real. They simply feel it. In the way they speak to each other, in the way they support each other's growth, in the calm comfort of being together. This sense of peace becomes one of the strongest indicators that the relationship has reached a new stage. Because peace is not the absence of love. It is the presence of trust. Trust allows both individuals to relax within the relationship. They no longer feel the need to constantly analyze the connection. They're not looking for signs that something might go wrong. They are simply present with each other. And presence creates a deeper kind of intimacy than emotional drama ever could. Another reason peace replaces intensity is that both individuals have learned how to regulate their emotions. During the earlier stages of the journey, emotional reactions may have been immediate and powerful. A misunderstanding could lead to hours of overthinking. A moment of distance could trigger anxiety or frustration. But after personal growth and healing, those reactions become less extreme. Both partners develop emotional awareness. They learn how to recognize their feelings without immediately acting on them. They learn how to communicate calmly even when something feels uncomfortable. This emotional maturity prevents small situations from turning into large conflicts. The result is a relationship that feels stable instead of unpredictable. Imagine two people sitting together in silence. During the earlier phases of the journey, that silence might have felt uncomfortable. One person might wonder if something is wrong. The other might feel pressure to fill the quiet space with conversation. But after union, that same silence can feel peaceful. It becomes a shared moment rather than an awkward one. Both individuals feel comfortable simply existing in the same space. This kind of comfort is often underestimated, but it is actually one of the strongest signs of emotional security in a relationship. When people no longer feel the need to perform, impress, or constantly reassure each other, their connection becomes more authentic. They are not trying to prove their love. They're living it. Another important aspect of this energetic shift is the feeling of emotional safety. During earlier stages, both individuals may have felt vulnerable in ways that were difficult to manage. The chaser feared losing the connection. The runner feared losing emotional control. These fears created tension. But once both individuals face those fears and grow beyond them, the relationship becomes a safe environment. Both partners know they can express their true thoughts and emotions without being judged or rejected. This safety allows love to deepen naturally. Without fear, people are able to reveal their authentic selves. They can share their dreams, their struggles, and their personal growth openly. And as they do, the connection becomes richer and more meaningful. Ironically, this peaceful stage of the relationship often feels more powerful than the earlier intensity, because the love is no longer dependent on emotional excitement. It is built on something far more stable: mutual respect,
Trust.
shared growth. Many twin flames describe this stage as feeling like coming home. Not the dramatic homecoming of a movie scene, but the quiet feeling of belonging. The sense that you can finally relax and be yourself without fear. The relationship becomes a place where both individuals recharge their energy rather than drain it, where challenges are faced together rather than alone, and where love is expressed not only through passionate moments, but through everyday acts of care and understanding. Of course, this peaceful energy does not mean the relationship becomes dull or lifeless. Joy still exists. Passion still exists. Excitement still appears. But these emotions arise naturally instead of being fueled by conflict or uncertainty. The relationship becomes balanced, emotionally, spiritually, and energetically. And this balance allows both individuals to continue growing together rather than constantly repairing emotional damage. But this transformation also introduces an important question. If the connection becomes calmer and more peaceful, if intensity is replaced with stability, does that mean the love itself becomes less passionate? Or does something deeper begin to emerge in place of the emotional extremes that once defined the relationship? One of the most profound transformations that happens after twin flame union is the shift from intense attachment to mature love. At first glance, these two experiences can look very similar. Both involve deep emotions, strong attraction, and a powerful bond between two people. But beneath the surface, they are very different. And understanding this difference is essential for anyone trying to understand what truly changes after union. During the earlier phases of the twin flame journey, what many people experience is not only love, it is also attachment. Attachment often feels extremely intense. It can create the feeling that your happiness depends on another person's presence. When they're close, everything feels wonderful. When they're distant, the emotional pain can feel overwhelming. Many people describe this stage as feeling addicted to the connection. They think about the other person constantly. They replay conversations in their mind. They search for hidden meanings in every interaction. Their emotional state becomes closely tied to what the other person says or does. If the relationship feels secure, they feel happy. If the relationship feels uncertain, anxiety quickly appears. This pattern is very common in the early stages of powerful romantic connections, especially in twin flame relationships where the emotional bond can feel almost magnetic. But attachment, despite its intensity, is not the same as mature love. Attachment is often driven by fear. Fear of losing the connection. Fear of being abandoned. Fear of not being enough. Because these fears exist beneath the surface, attachment tends to create emotional instability. Even moments of happiness may carry a hidden tension. There is always a subtle question in the background. Will this last? This is why attachment can feel so exhausting. The emotional highs are powerful, but the emotional lows can be just as strong. Mature love, on the other hand, operates very differently. Mature love is not built on fear. It is built on emotional security. When someone experiences mature love, they still care deeply about the other person. They still value the connection. But their sense of self does not disappear inside the relationship. They remain emotionally grounded. Their happiness is not entirely dependent on another person's actions. Instead of clinging to the relationship out of fear, they choose to remain in it because it enriches their life. This difference may sound subtle, but it changes everything. Imagine two different couples. The first couple is deeply attached to each other, but they are constantly worried about losing the relationship. When one partner spends time with friends, the other feels insecure. When a message is not answered quickly, anxiety appears. They love each other, but the relationship often feels tense. Now imagine the second couple. They also love each other deeply, but their love is built on trust and mutual respect. If one partner needs time alone, the other does not interpret it as rejection. If life becomes busy for a few days, they remain confident in the strength of the connection. They enjoy being together, but they also respect each other's individuality. This second relationship represents mature love. And this is the stage many twin flames eventually reach after union. The transformation happens gradually. Through the challenges of the journey, both individuals are forced to examine their emotional patterns. They begin to recognize when their reactions come from fear rather than genuine love. For example, someone might realize that their urge to constantly check on their partner is not about caring. It is about seeking reassurance. Another person might realize that their instinct to avoid emotional conversations is not about independence. It is about fear of vulnerability. As these realizations deepen, both individuals begin to change their behavior. They learn to express love without controlling the other person. They learn to communicate honestly without demanding immediate emotional responses. And slowly, attachment begins to transform into something more stable. Respect.
Trust.
Freedom. This freedom is one of the most beautiful aspects of mature love. It allows both partners to remain fully themselves. They do not feel the need to sacrifice their identity to keep the relationship alive. Instead, the relationship becomes a space where individuality is respected. Each person continues growing, exploring their interests, and evolving as an individual. But instead of growing apart, they grow together. Because mature love supports expansion rather than restriction. This type of connection feels very different from the emotional urgency of attachment. Attachment often says, "I need you to stay with me so I can feel secure." Mature love says, "I choose you, even though I know I am complete on my own." This shift from need to choice transforms the entire emotional atmosphere of the relationship. When love is based on choice rather than dependence, it becomes more resilient. Challenges no longer feel like threats to the connection. They become opportunities to strengthen understanding. Both partners feel safe enough to express their true thoughts and emotions. They do not hide parts of themselves out of fear that the other person will leave. Instead, they trust that honesty will deepen the connection. Another sign of mature love is patience. During earlier stages of the twin flame journey, emotions often move quickly. People want answers immediately. They want reassurance right away. But mature love allows space for natural rhythms. It understands that people sometimes need time to process their feelings. It respects the emotional pace of both partners. This patience creates a calmer environment where both individuals can express themselves authentically. And when authenticity becomes the foundation of the relationship, something extraordinary happens. The love becomes deeper than ever before, not because it is more intense, but because it is more real. There are no emotional masks, no hidden expectations, no desperate attempts to control the outcome. Just two individuals sharing their lives openly. This stage of love often surprises people who spent years experiencing the dramatic intensity of earlier phases. Because mature love may not feel like a constant emotional roller coaster. It feels steadier, more peaceful. But within that peace is something incredibly powerful. A love that does not collapse under pressure. A love that continues growing as both individuals evolve. And this realization leads to another important reflection. Many people spend years chasing emotional intensity, believing that the strongest love must always feel dramatic. But what if the deepest love actually feels calm? What if true connection is not proven through emotional chaos, but through quiet stability? And if mature love truly replaces intense attachment after union? How can someone recognize whether they are ready for that level of emotional connection? At this point in the journey, an important question begins to appear. A question that many people on the twin flame path do not ask themselves often enough. Are you truly ready for the peaceful version of this connection? Or are you still unconsciously seeking the emotional intensity that defined the earlier stages? This question may sound simple, but the answer can reveal a lot about where someone currently stands in their personal growth. Because the truth is, many people say they want union. They say they want stability, emotional balance, and a relationship that feels safe and secure. But deep down, part of them may still be attached to the intensity of the journey.
Why?
Because emotional intensity can feel exciting. When emotions swing between extreme closeness and painful distance, the experience can become addictive. The brain releases powerful chemicals during these emotional highs and lows, creating a cycle that feels almost impossible to ignore. When a message suddenly arrives after days of silence, the relief feels overwhelming. When the connection reconnects after a period of distance, the emotional reunion can feel magical. These moments create powerful memories. And over time, some people begin to associate this intensity with love itself. They believe that if a relationship does not feel dramatic, it must not be special. But this belief can make it difficult to recognize the true nature of union. Because when the relationship finally becomes peaceful, the emotional experience feels very different. There are fewer dramatic reunions, fewer moments of emotional desperation, fewer sleepless nights analyzing every interaction. Instead, the connection begins to feel stable, predictable, comfortable. And for someone who has spent years experiencing emotional extremes, this stability can feel unfamiliar, sometimes even uncomfortable. It is similar to someone who has lived in a noisy environment for a very long time. When they finally enter a quiet space, the silence may feel strange at first. They may even miss the noise they once complained about. The same psychological pattern can appear in relationships. If someone becomes used to emotional chaos, peace may feel unfamiliar. And unfamiliar experiences often trigger doubt. A person might begin asking themselves questions like, why does this feel so calm? Where is the intensity we used to have? Does this mean the connection is fading? But in reality, the calmness may be the strongest sign that both individuals have evolved. The relationship is no longer fueled by emotional triggers. It is sustained by mutual understanding and trust. This is why reaching union requires more than just love. It requires emotional readiness. Both individuals must be able to appreciate stability rather than constantly searching for excitement. They must understand that love can exist without drama. That connection can remain strong even when life feels peaceful. This does not mean passion disappears. Passion still exists. Attraction still exists. But those feelings are no longer tied to emotional instability. Instead, they grow naturally within a balanced environment. This balanced environment allows both partners to focus on something new, building a life together. During earlier stages of the journey, most of the emotional energy is spent navigating the connection itself, trying to understand it, trying to repair misunderstandings, trying to manage the emotional intensity. But once both individuals reach a state of emotional maturity, their focus shifts outward. Instead of constantly analyzing the relationship, they begin creating shared experiences. They support each other's personal goals. They explore new possibilities together. The relationship becomes a foundation rather than a puzzle to solve. However, this stage can only happen when both individuals are truly ready for it. If one person is still seeking emotional excitement or dramatic proof of love, they may unintentionally recreate old patterns. They might provoke unnecessary conflict. They might question the stability of the relationship. They might search for hidden problems where none actually exist. Not because they want to damage the connection, but because part of them still associates emotional intensity with meaning. This is why personal awareness is so important on the twin flame journey. Each person must examine their own expectations about love. Ask themselves honestly, do I feel comfortable in a peaceful relationship? Or do I only feel alive when emotions are intense and unpredictable? This self-reflection can reveal whether someone is truly prepared for union. Because union is not simply about two people being together again. It is about sustaining a healthy connection over time. And healthy connections require emotional stability, the ability to communicate calmly, the ability to trust even when life becomes busy, the ability to support each other's independence without feeling threatened. These qualities do not appear overnight. They develop through personal growth, through learning from past experiences, through understanding one's own emotional patterns. This is why many twin flame journeys include periods of separation. Separation provides the space needed for individual transformation. Without that space, people may remain stuck in the same reactive patterns. But when both individuals use that time to grow, something remarkable becomes possible. The relationship can evolve into something far more meaningful than the original emotional intensity. It can become a partnership built on maturity and shared purpose. And this kind of partnership offers something that emotional drama never could.
Peace.
Peace does not mean the absence of excitement. It means the absence of fear. It means knowing that the connection does not depend on constant emotional validation. It means trusting that both individuals are committed to growth and understanding. For many people, reaching this stage of peace feels like discovering a completely new definition of love. A love that does not demand constant proof. A love that does not disappear during quiet moments. A love that remains steady through both joyful experiences and everyday life. And this realization leads to one final reflection. If the entire twin flame journey ultimately leads to peace, if the emotional storms were only temporary lessons, then perhaps the real purpose of the journey was never just about finding another person. Perhaps it was about becoming the kind of person who can truly experience that level of love. And if that is true, then the final question becomes even more powerful. Are you waiting for union to bring you peace? Or are you becoming peaceful enough within yourself to finally welcome it? At the beginning of the twin flame journey, many people imagine union as the ultimate emotional climax. They picture a dramatic reunion filled with tears, passion, and overwhelming declarations of love. After all the pain, the separation, the running and chasing, it seems logical to assume that the final stage would be an explosion of emotion. But the truth is often the opposite. For many twin flames, the moment union begins to stabilize, something surprising happens. The intensity that once defined the connection slowly fades into something quieter, deeper, and far more meaningful. Union does not feel like chaos anymore. It feels like peace. And for many people, that peace is the biggest sign that the relationship has finally evolved into its true form. In the earlier stages of the journey, the connection often feels like a storm. Emotions are amplified. Every word matters. Every silence feels significant. A small misunderstanding can trigger deep wounds, and a simple moment together can feel like the most powerful experience of your life. This intensity is not accidental. The twin flame connection acts like a mirror. It reflects every unresolved fear, every hidden insecurity, and every unhealed wound inside both people. Because the bond is so strong, those emotional patterns surface quickly and powerfully. This is why the early stages of the journey can feel so overwhelming. One person may run away from the connection, feeling afraid of its depth. The other may chase, desperately trying to hold onto something that feels both magical and painful at the same time. The dynamic becomes a cycle. Connection, trigger, distance, longing, reunion, and then the cycle repeats. For a long time, many people believe the cycle is the relationship itself. They think the drama is proof of how powerful the love is. But the deeper truth is that the drama is not the purpose of the connection. It is only the healing process. And once that healing begins to take place within both individuals, the entire nature of the relationship starts to transform. Imagine two people who once reacted to each other with intense emotion. A delayed message once caused anxiety. A misunderstanding once led to days of silence. A small disagreement once turned into a painful argument. Now imagine those same two people after years of inner growth. They have faced their fears. They have confronted their emotional wounds. They have learned to stand on their own. When they meet again, something feels different. The connection is still powerful. The recognition is still there. But the chaos is gone. Instead of reacting with fear, they respond with understanding. Instead of assuming rejection, they communicate openly. Instead of clinging to each other out of emotional need, they choose each other from a place of freedom. This is the true meaning of union. Union is not the moment two people finally say, "We are together." Union is the moment two souls reach a level of emotional maturity where the connection no longer creates suffering. At this stage, love becomes something stable rather than something overwhelming. Conversations feel easier. Silences feel comfortable. Time together feels natural rather than dramatic. There is no need to constantly prove love because both people can feel it without words. Many twin flames describe this stage as feeling almost ordinary at first. And that can be confusing. After such an intense journey, some people expect union to feel extraordinary every moment. They expect constant passion and emotional fireworks. But the reality is something much more beautiful. It feels safe. It feels calm. It feels like home. This calmness does not mean the connection has lost its depth. In fact, the depth becomes even stronger. The difference is that the energy is no longer chaotic. It becomes harmonious. Both people can pursue their personal growth without fearing the loss of the relationship. Both people can express their thoughts without worrying about triggering abandonment. Both people understand that love does not require control, pressure, or emotional games. Love simply exists. To understand this transformation, imagine the difference between a wildfire and a steady flame. A wildfire is intense and impossible to ignore. It spreads quickly. It consumes everything around it. It creates dramatic destruction and overwhelming heat. But it cannot sustain itself for long. Eventually, it burns out. A steady flame, however, is different. It may look less dramatic, but it lasts much longer. It provides warmth. It creates light. It supports life instead of destroying it. The early stages of the twin flame journey often resemble the wildfire. The final stage resembles the steady flame. This is the stage where love matures. And mature love looks very different from the romantic fantasies many people grow up believing. Mature love is patient. Mature love respects boundaries. Mature love allows both individuals to remain whole rather than dependent. In this stage, neither person needs the other to fill an emotional void. Instead, they walk beside each other as two complete individuals. This shift is incredibly powerful. Because when love no longer comes from fear or emotional lack, it becomes something that can truly grow. The relationship becomes a partnership rather than a rescue mission. There is room for dreams, creativity, and shared purpose. Some twin flames even discover that once union stabilizes, their connection begins to influence their lives in new ways. They feel inspired to create, teach, heal, or contribute to the world in meaningful ways. The relationship becomes a source of strength rather than emotional chaos. But perhaps the most important transformation happens internally. Each person finally feels free. Free from the constant emotional roller coaster. Free from the fear of losing the connection. Free from the need to control the outcome. Instead of asking, "Will we stay together?" the question becomes irrelevant. Because the connection has moved beyond insecurity. It exists naturally, without pressure, without expectation, just presence. And this leads to a powerful realization. The purpose of the twin flame journey was never just about finding the other person. It was about becoming the person capable of experiencing this level of love. The separation stages teach independence. The triggers teach self-awareness. The healing teaches emotional responsibility. And union becomes the natural result of that transformation. When both souls reach this level of growth, the relationship stops feeling like a challenge that must be solved. It becomes a space where two people can simply live, grow, and support each other. That is why many people say the most beautiful part of the twin flame journey begins after union. Not because everything suddenly becomes perfect, but because love finally becomes peaceful. And peace is something far more powerful than drama. So, if you are currently on this journey, ask yourself a simple question. Are you chasing intensity? Or are you ready for the quiet strength of a peaceful connection? Because true union does not arrive with noise or emotional chaos. It arrives quietly, like a deep breath after a long storm, like the calm ocean after powerful waves, like the feeling of finally coming home. And if this message resonates with you, it may mean that your own journey is moving toward that place of balance and clarity. The path may still require patience. It may still ask you to continue healing and growing. But every step you take toward inner peace brings you closer to the kind of love that no longer needs to struggle to survive. A love that simply exists. If you found meaning in this message, consider sharing your experience in the comments. Where are you currently in your twin flame journey? Are you still navigating the intense stages of separation and healing, or are you beginning to experience the calm energy of union? Your story may inspire someone else who is walking the same path. And if you want to explore more insights about twin flame growth, healing, and union, don't forget to like this video and subscribe to the channel for future content. Because sometimes the greatest transformation in love does not come from finding someone else. It comes from becoming the version of yourself that is finally ready for peace.
Thank you for spending this moment with me. If this message resonated with your soul, remember to subscribe and continue this journey with us here on Twin Flame Journey. And always remember, what is meant for your soul will always find its way back to you.